Okay, so let me, so all of you are all together? Is that what you're doing?
Yes, we are all together.
Okay. We also have Tony Thompson from my office with us.
Perfect. Hi, Tony.
He's the main person currently handling clearinghouse services that we provide to our clearinghouse services clients.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Tony.
Good morning.
So we are recording, and we wanted to take this time today to kind of go over the basics of the FMCSA Clearinghouse and what you need to know, and then talk a little bit about how you might be providing services to your customers that are wanting to retain you to do clearinghouse services for them. So if there's any questions, please go ahead and speak up, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Great.
So the Clearinghouse is an online database managed by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. It went into effect 3 years ago, so it's currently starting now. And previously, before the Clearinghouse, DOT, FMCSA regulated employers, upon hiring a new person in a safety sensitive position, they were required to go back to previous employers and ask those previous employers in writing if those drivers had any previous violations. And if so, then they need to deal with those violations to make sure the person had, completed the required SAP program and eligible to come back to duty. That requirement remains for all the other DOT agencies, but now with Clearinghouse being 3 years in, that paper consent going back to previous employers is no longer required. But doing a query in the Clearinghouse when a new person is hired is required, and that's how you find out if they've had any violations in the past year. And they may be on a prohibited status, which means you can't put them to work until they clear up that prohibited status. Or they're clear, basically. They're clear to go to work. Okay, and this includes holders of commercial driver's licenses, as well as holders of commercial learner's permits. So that would include people that, with a commercial learner's permit, a CLP, are going into a truck driving school and driving a truck on commercial highways, commercial roads. So they're required also to have a query in the Clearinghouse and to not be prohibited. So the first thing we always cover is, what is the MRO required to do? So for these functions, there isn't anything that a TPA needs to do, because the MRO is required to perform these functions, okay? Report to the Clearinghouse all positive drug tests and all refusals to test that were determined by the MRO. Refusals to test that are determined by the MRO are typically lab-based results that come back as adulterated, or lab-based results that come back as substituted. When a specimen never goes to a lab, there's no MRO involvement. So it's not the MRO who's reporting a refusal where, for example, someone left in the middle of a shy bladder process. So it is required that those refusals be reported by the employer. However, U.S. drug test centers may be providing services for clients, and those services would be the tasks that the employer is required to perform. And as a TPA, U.S. drug test centers might be required to perform those tasks if that's what you're being hired to do by your client. There's nothing on the part of the TPA to do with regard to positive drug tests, but with alcohol drug tests, technically speaking, there's no MRO review. The breath alcohol technician should be reporting alcohol test results to the employer. the employer then has responsibility of reporting positive alcohol test results. Again, that may be a task that U.S. Drug Test Centers is doing for a client that has retained them to do clearinghouse services. Now, you do report alcohol test results in the MRO system, but they are not reviewed by an MRO. They're in there based on a manual entry or an integration for reporting purposes only. And again, technically speaking, particularly with a positive result, the breath alcohol technician should be reporting and calling with a positive directly to the employer, directly to the DER. So what is the employer required to do? And these are things that U.S. Drug Test Centers might help the employer with or perform some of these things for the employer. Number one is register in the FMCSA Clearinghouse. So every company regulated by FMCSA must register and set up an account in the FMCSA Clearinghouse. That can sometimes be a tedious, complex process. We'll come back to that. Query of new employees as they're being hired. An annual query based on a 365-day rolling period of all existing employees covered by FMCSA. Reporting of alcohol positives, 0.04 or above. Reporting of employer-determined refusals, either drug or alcohol. Reporting of an actual knowledge situation where an employer has actual knowledge that the employee is using drugs or alcohol while working. That could be a DUI on company time in a company truck. That could be witnessing use of drugs or alcohol. It's not based on secondhand information from a coworker, and it's not a reasonable suspicion situation. Return to duty test is when someone comes back to work after a violation and after a completion of the SAP evaluation. A return to duty test is required. It needs to be under direct observation. And if it's negative, if it's positive, it will be reported by the MRO. But that's the only time a negative test does get reported by the employer. And all these things where I say reported by the employer or employer required tasks, these are all things that you might be doing for your customers. The follow-up testing, you don't report any results. At the conclusion of the follow-up testing, so maybe they have six follow-up tests required over the course of the first year coming back from the SAP. They only have to do 6 tests. At the conclusion of that 6th test, the employer reports completion of the follow-up testing. Now, they may have 60 tests over 5 years, so you wouldn't make that report until the end of the 5 years. And then number 9, FMCSA regulated employers are required to have a policy. They're required to educate employees of the policy and of the regulations. So if they have not already, they need to update their policies and they need to update their educational programs to notify drivers of what information will be reported to the clearinghouse. So let me just pause, see if you got any questions here.
I think we're okay so far, Joe.
Okay. So the queries. Again, the pre-employment query is required. The annual query is required. It can be a limited query. It could be a full query. We'll come back to that. In order to have a query run in the FMCSA Clearinghouse, the employer needs to have been registered and they need to have purchased query credits from the FMCSA. So the employer has to purchase those credits in their account in the clearinghouse. Tony, how much are those query credits?
$1.25.
$1.25. Yeah, couldn't hit my unmute button fast enough. Sorry.
$1.25, and how many do we typically recommend, Tony, that they purchase?
Well, for our owner operators, we recommend that they purchase 4 because a lot of them have to have that pre-employment query done. And then it gives them the next 3 years for their annual query.
Okay, and what about companies with multiple drivers?
It depends on how many drivers they have. The least that I recommend is 10. If they have like 3 drivers, get at least 10, because if you're looking to hire additional drivers, you're going to need to do that pre-employment query. So you want to make sure you have enough on your account to accomplish what you need.
Okay, yeah, and I would say at a minimum 2 times the number of drivers they have. So if they have 10 drivers, they should purchase 20 because they're going to use some for pre-employments and they're going to need those 10 credits for the annual query. Now, when you run a query on the annual query, you're doing a full query or a limited query. The full query is just the same as the pre-employment query. The query is ordered in the employer's account, okay? And before the query is actually run, the FMCSA Clearinghouse sends an email to the driver to have them provide consent to have that full query run. Now, in order for the driver to receive that email, they must have been registered in the clearinghouse. So going back to the pre-employment queries, every driver's got to register that's being hired. They got to register before the query is run. Now, for existing drivers that have worked for the company, okay, prior to the start of the clearinghouse, maybe they worked there for 20 years, the annual query can be run on what's called a limited query. The limited query does not require the driver to have been registered in advance because the consent form is done outside of the clearinghouse. It could be done on a paper form. It could be done on a yearly basis or unlimited basis that the driver signs a form that you guys have available to you that says you can run limited queries on me. And they're consenting on that paper form outside of the clearinghouse. Now, if when the limited query is run and there's a hit on that driver, in other words, they're prohibited, okay, you're going to have to get that driver to register because that limited query is now going to convert to a full query. And the driver is going to have to consent electronically in the FMCSA Clearinghouse, and they do need to be registered for that to happen. Tony, anything you want to add on that, on a limited query where it goes to a full query?
Yes, actually, a limited query, when it goes to a full query, it automatically does that. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're prohibited. It just means they found information in the system. Because if they had a violation, even if they've completed their SAP program, completed their follow-up testing, it's still going to let that employer know that they had a previous violation. However, they are not prohibited from driving because they cleared it up. It's going to do that for 5 years after they've completed the program.
Okay, excellent. Okay, reporting positive alcohol results. So again, these are 0.04 or above. Alcohol testing should be reported from the breath alcohol technician to the employer. That's what the regulations say. Although it doesn't always happen, but it should definitely happen on a positive. There needs to be a removal from the safety sensitive position. The driver is provided a list of SAPs by the employer. Maybe they get fired too, that's okay. But they have to be provided a list of SAPs. What's on a list? At least 2. Or they get provided the name and phone number of a SAP referral service, and then that SAP referral service provides the list of SAPs to the driver. And then that positive alcohol test or a refusal of an alcohol test needs to be reported to the clearinghouse. And the driver will be in a prohibited status until they complete the SAP's evaluation process. Employer-determined refusals. Most, if not many, refusals to test are employer-determined. So when does that happen? Well, you tell the guy to go for his random test, and he says, I'm not going. That's a refusal. You tell the guy to go for his random test, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and he doesn't go till 4 in the afternoon. That's a refusal. He gets to the facility, there's a whole bunch of people in the waiting room, and he leaves. That's a refusal. They start the testing process, and he gets a shy bladder, and he doesn't wait the 3 hours. He says, the heck with this, and he leaves. He doesn't comply with the testing procedures. He's confrontational. He won't do what he's supposed to do. It's a refusal. The documentation of what happened should be reported from the collector to the DER. The driver should be removed from the safety sensitive position. Maybe he gets fired, or she, and that situation must be reported to the clearinghouse with documentation. Actual knowledge is not reasonable suspicion. It's evidence that a driver has used alcohol or controlled substances while performing FMCSA safety sensitive duties. What is not actual knowledge? A DUI not on work time in a personal vehicle. Report from a coworker. Reasonable suspicion based on signs and symptoms. Actual knowledge is you know the person is using drugs or alcohol while working. Again, as I mentioned, DUI on company time in a company vehicle, witness of alcohol while driving in a truck, witness of illicit drugs while driving in a truck on the company premises. These are actual knowledge. Tony, have you had actual knowledge situations you can talk about?
Yes, I actually had one with one of our clearinghouse customers, and it does require, so you might want to check that out just, for your knowledge and education. It does require quite a bit of documentation. You have to provide evidence and upload documentation that substantiates the actual knowledge that occurred. For the particular one that I had to do, they actually found their driver passed out in the bathroom, and he was removed by emergency services because he had OD'd. So they had quite a bit of documentation to provide for me to upload. So it's a process.
Yeah. And again, what's important, it's not just somebody saying, oh, I saw Bubba smoking a joint. That's not employer actual knowledge. Might be the coworker's actual knowledge, but it's not the employer's actual knowledge. So, actual knowledge, admission of drugs or alcohol use is actual knowledge, but there is an exception under 382.121 where you're admitting to it and you're asking for help. DUI while operating commercial vehicle, direct observation of drugs or alcohol. Again, remove them from a safety sensitive position, provide a list of SAPs or a SAP referral service, report to the clearinghouse. Return to duty. So when a driver is removed from the safety sensitive position, maybe they're fired, maybe they're not, in either case, you're required to go to see the SAP, the substance abuse professional. Now, if they don't go to see the SAP, they're never going to get back into a DOT covered position again. So if they decide, I'm not going to be a truck driver anymore, I'm not going to work for any other DOT agency, I'm going to go work in a warehouse, or I'm going to go work doing construction, they don't have to go to see a SAP, they got nothing to worry about. But 10 years later, they go to let's say 4 years later, because the records are kept for 5 years, they go get a truck driving job, they're going to be on the prohibited list. So when the staff evaluation follow-up letter becomes available, they send it to the employer. If it's owner operator, they send it to the TPA. If there's no employer, they don't send it to anybody just yet. Okay, they might send it to the driver and redact the follow-up testing requirements. Okay, the return to duty test has to be under the auspices of the employer or a employer, or if it's an owner operator, a TPA. You can't just go get your own return to duty test while you're unemployed. So the employer or the TPA for an owner operator will report a negative return to duty test. That's part of the process to get the driver off the prohibited status. When the follow-up testing is complete, the only thing you report is that the follow-up testing is complete. You're not reporting the result of any follow-up testing. The SAP does have some reporting requirements in the clearinghouse. The SAP is required to record in the clearinghouse the date the initial evaluation is completed. That's the first evaluation with the driver, and the date of eligibility for return to work based on the completion successfully of the return to duty test. Those are the only requirements of the SAP in the clearinghouse. If the SAP doesn't know anything about those requirements, they should get a new SAP, because the SAP is required to do these two things. There's no other reporting requirements for the return to duty process. Drivers, what do drivers have to do? When they register in the clearinghouse, they register as a driver as opposed to, Tony, can you talk about an owner operator registering?
An owner operator has to register as both an employer and driver. It's one of the options. The initial option they would select would be employer. Then it's going to drop down an additional box. It's going to ask them, are you an employer or are you an employer and driver? So they have to select the employer and driver, because it's going to give them two dashboard options once they're completed registration. They need the driver dashboard so they can consent to any full query, and they need the employer dashboard to purchase their queries.
Okay, excellent. And you might provide a service for owner operators where you help them register. Okay, they got to register themselves, but you can help them. And Tony, describe how that process goes.
Actually, we do that quite often here. An owner operator will call. We let them know, if they were initially registered as a driver, they would need to go back to the login.gov site and delete their driver account. Now, it doesn't delete information, because information is tied specifically to their CDL number. So they would have to delete that driver account, then re-register. They can use the same email address they use for their driver account. And then they're going to register as an employer and driver. And we take them through the steps down to how to designate your CTPA, to make sure they check the boxes that are necessary for you to perform your task as their CTPA. They can certainly do their own queries. However, they cannot self-report. So they have to, at minimum, provide you the ability to report violations and report return to duty. They can certainly run their own query, but we generally get them to do all three. And it's a very quick process if you have somebody that knows how to navigate a computer. Takes me about 15 minutes, start to finish, to get an owner operator registered in the clearinghouse over the phone. There is actually resources on the clearinghouse under the Learning Center. If they select that, it looks like books on a shelf. It says owner operator resources. Everything in there is a hyperlink. It's going to open up the document that shows them step by step how to register and what they need to do. Does it for employers, does it for drivers, CTPAs, MROs, and SAPs. It gives you a breakdown of everything that they need to do.
Okay, so going back to helping them register, they're on their computer doing everything and you're walking them through it, is that correct?
Yes, I do want to note that there's kind of a gray area with that. There's a question under the facts clearinghouse FAQs where
Right.
an employer can help a driver register. They can actually do it for them. However, that driver has to be present. They have to give them the email address. Only the driver can have access to their login. So what happens is you would create that initial login. They're going to get the code. They then have to provide you the code so that you can actually go into the clearinghouse and complete the registration process for them. But it has to be only the driver with access to that after the registration is complete. So it's kind of a little bit of a gray area where
Okay.
they will allow you to actually do that.
Okay, so what you just mentioned, that's a driver as opposed to an owner operator?
Yes, that's a driver. I mean, they can do it for an owner operator too, I suppose, but it's not something I would recommend.
Okay, so moving past owner operators, which let me just stay with owner operators for a minute. You mentioned they can run their own query and they can run their own annual query, but we can provide a service where we do it for them, correct?
Yes, yes.
And now moving over to the driver, do we have situations where we help drivers register?
With clearinghouse services, yes, they can certainly purchase driver assistance. And that's what we do. We provide them the walkthrough of how to get themselves registered just as a driver.
Okay, so this driver is employed by somebody and they have to register and they're looking for help and we charge that driver a fee to help them register.
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to be clear. So once the driver's registered, if there's a query run, they're going to get an email consent to provide consent. They can view information that's on them. There may not be any, but if there is, they can view it. If they feel there's incorrect information, they can submit challenges. For the limited query, the employer may have them sign a paper consent or can do it with like a PDF DocuSign. That's what I mean by electronic consent there. It's not a consent from the clearinghouse. It's just an electronic consent that the employer uses. Okay. If there's a violation, they need to identify the SAP who will evaluate them. And the last question, does every driver have to register? And the reason I say maybe is because if an employer has, every owner operator has to register, every new owner operator, okay? If an employer has employees that have been with them over 3 years right now, okay, and they've never had a violation, and they've never had, and they don't do drugs or alcohol, and they don't plan on ever having a violation, they technically don't have to register, okay? Because they're never going to get electronic consent on a full query if they don't use drugs or alcohol, and they've never used drugs or alcohol. So technically not every driver registers, okay? But every new driver coming into the business today would be required to register. Okay, so as a CTPA, you can provide services to help employers and owner operators, or you cannot provide services to help them. TPA's option, okay? Submit queries, reporting on behalf of owner operators, reporting on behalf of employers, guidance and consultation, policy and educational update as part of a drug-free workplace policy, or to add that on if they already have a policy. Top questions in 2021. We didn't update 22 yet. We're a small company with only one driver. Do we have to participate in the clearinghouse? Yes. All motor carriers that are DOT, FMCSA regulated must participate in the clearinghouse. Owner operators must use a TPA to help them manage their drug and alcohol clearinghouse account because they can't do their own reporting. I have a violation. What do I need to do to start driving again? They need to complete the return to duty process with the substance abuse professional. They have an initial evaluation, they have treatment and/or education, they have a follow-up evaluation, and then they're eligible for their return to duty testing. How long will the violation stay on my record? The violation will be on the record for 5 years until the return to duty process is completed, whichever is later. If you do not complete the return to duty process, the violation will stay indefinitely. Now, they might be on the cleared status after completing the return to duty process and doing everything they're supposed to do. They go from the prohibited status to the cleared status, but that information will stay with them for 5 years. I'm trying to log into my Clearinghouse account, but it is sending the code to my old phone number. How can I update the information? I believe the only option is to delete the account and re-register. Is that correct, Tony?
Yes, it is. That's the only option they have, is to delete the account and re-register.
Okay. So that's troublesome when they got a new phone number and they don't have access to their old phone and phone number. They're unemployed. How do they take a return to duty test? Well, they don't until they either become an owner operator or they have a job offer. That's when they can take the return to duty test. Or if they're going back to the original employer is allowing them to come back to work. That happens a lot. We get these guys that are, they completed the SAP process. They want to get that return to duty test done, but they're not going for a job and they're not becoming an owner operator. You get that question, Tony?
All the time, actually get drivers calling in, I got my return to duty test done, and how do I get it reported? Okay, did an employer do the test? Are you an owner operator? Those are the questions I ask, because then I have to go through explaining to them that only an employer can conduct that return to duty test.
Yeah, and they may have to do it again when they're going to work for somebody, because it may be 6 months later or whatever, and the employer may or may not accept that return to duty test. Okay, I don't have the current statistics here, so I think this is kind of old news, so I'm going to skip over this. But you can look up in the Clearinghouse the statistics on the number of violations and the number of refusals and actual knowledge and those type of things. Okay, so help is available. MROs, SAPs, drivers, TPAs can offer drug and alcohol testing services. We have a company called FMCSA Clearinghouse Services.com. We provide ongoing consultation. If you need help or you have any questions, you might get a quicker answer calling us than calling the FMCSA Clearinghouse people. So that service is available with an annual membership, which I believe you guys are taking advantage of that. So I believe this is what you guys are offering for U.S. drug test centers. If maybe you could summarize, Callie, what you guys are offering to your clients for the new people can hear it.
Sure, yeah, so we offer full clearinghouse management services. So everything you described that an employer has a responsibility to do, we either assist them with or do on their behalf. So we assist them with their registration. We walk them through the CTPA designation as well as purchasing their query credits. We give them unlimited consultation so we can assist their drivers with registration if they need assistance, or we will send them driver registration instructions to help them themselves. We run re-employment queries as long as query credits are available. Same with annual queries. And then we will schedule return to duty testing and report it for their drivers. Same thing for follow-up testing and follow-up testing plan completion. We will also report any employer-determined refusals or actual knowledge if we are given the documentation.
Okay. So Tony, in order for a TPA to report, refusals or alcohol violations, the company needs to have designated that particular TPA in the system, correct?
Yes.
Right. And then as a TPA, the TPA needs to be registered, which of course US Drug Test Centers is registered. The TPA in their account can go in because they've been designated and can do the reporting or the queries on behalf of that employer. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
See, I learn something every day here, it's really good. Okay. With that, open up for questions. And Callie, anything else you want to add about the services you're providing or the onboarding with your customers?
Yeah, actually our team has a couple questions for you and Tony, Joe, if you don't mind. So we'll start with Lo.
Hey, Joe.
Hi, Lo. How you been? Long
Good,
time.
real good. Yeah. My first question is, how long from when they delete the account can they make a new account?
That is 24 hours.
Oh, good to know.
Good to know.
I
So
thought
they
it was
delete the
immediate.
account and 24 hours later, they can go open the new account?
Yes, they have to give it 24 hours for it to clear out of the system. Then they can go back and recreate their account, but it is 24 hours.
Okay, excellent.
Awesome. And then one of the services we provide is we run the employer's own queries. Let's just say the employer ran their own instead of using us. How come we can't see when they ran their own query and what the outcome was for each driver?
Because you have to be the one that runs them. If they log into their own account and run them, they can only see the queries that they run. You can only see the queries that you run, even if you're running them on behalf of that employer. I only can see the queries that I have submitted. I can't
Right.
see any previous queries done by the employer themselves.
Right, but why though?
That would be a better question, I think, for the FMCSA. It's because they're only given access, what I think it is you only have access under your login for what you do.
Right.
They have
Yeah.
access under
It's
their
exactly
login
that.
for what they do.
Clearinghouse is saying is that you don't have privy to something that the employer did on their own because it's confidential.
Sure. Okay. Okay, I understand. I guess I just don't, well, I guess I don't understand why.
Yeah,
Designated-
it would make more sense for the designated TPA to see everything, but unfortunately, they probably have their own reasons for it, and they probably wouldn't give you a straight answer anyway.
Sure. Okay, no problem. My next question is, whenever they first register, a company first registers, and they don't properly put their correct employer name, I guess. Sometimes they use their email address as their name, company name, or their personal first and last name. Can they go in and edit their company name to make it the correct company name?
No, they would have to delete the account and re-register. It doesn't allow you to make those kinds of edits in the system. Once you've registered, that's how you're registered. They would have to go in there and delete that registration and recreate it.
Okay.
Tony, is there any validation with the DOT number when they register with their company name?
Well, if they're connecting their FMCSA portal account to their Clearinghouse account, when they connect that, it ports the information over as it is in the FMCSA portal account. So it'll port their DOT number over, and it will port the name that they registered in the FMCSA portal with.
I understand. Okay. Another question is, whenever a company assigns us as their TPA and it shows pending and we have to accept them, if we decline them, but then they go back and try to make us a third party, can they use us again, or is it like one and done?
No, they can absolutely use you again. The
Okay.
only thing is they have to go back in and they're going to still see that they selected you the first time.
Right.
And it's going to show that you revoked them. Well, they need to delete your information out of that box.
Right.
They need to log out, log back in, and then they can redesignate you. If they don't delete it and then like save it, log out and log back in, it's not going to let them select you a second time.
I understand. Okay. I think that's it.
For me, Gabby, Jamin, anything? Gabby, you want to come over here?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Gabby.
Gabby.
So you were saying that if a person entered their old phone number and they wanted to go back and change it, that they would receive an authorization code? But how would they do that if it's on the old phone? Would they get the authorization code? Where would they get the authorization code?
If their number has
Delete it.
changed and they didn't have the foresight to log in prior to changing their number and updating the number in their account, the only option they have is to delete the account. Because they're never going to get that authorization code. So they have to delete and start over.
But how can they delete it if they cannot log in? Because I've had that happen before where they couldn't get, it was an old number. And so I had them call Clearinghouse.
They have to go to the login.gov site, not the clearinghouse, in order to delete the account. So if they're telling you that I'm trying to log in, but I'm not getting the code, that's because they're trying to log in to the clearinghouse, not login.gov. They need to go
Okay,
to
login.gov.
login.gov
Okay.
to delete the account.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Chicken, do you have any questions?
Oh. Well, so we're wondering about the bulk upload. Why it's so difficult to run queries for like one company? Why we can't just do the bulk upload?
Well, it would depend on whether or not you actually have your bulk upload template lined up exactly as it is on the clearinghouse, because we do bulk uploads all the time. And we have no issue. I mean, we get back, the results, and we're keeping track of all that. So if there's an issue with a particular driver, if they were unable to verify it, or if now they're going to have to give consent, we let the company know that. We send them the exported spreadsheet of all the results of the queries that we conducted on their behalf. But you have to make sure that the spreadsheet you're using is the spreadsheet that they actually have on the clearinghouse. If you don't have those columns and the information in the column the way it shows on their sample, it's not going to allow the upload to go through.
Tony, just to clarify, are we able to do a bulk upload of drivers from multiple companies?
No, you can only do it on a company basis. So if you've got 200 owner operators, you are doing 200 individual queries. You can't put all them on one spreadsheet and upload it. It doesn't work that way. It only does it per company. So if you have an employer that has 30 drivers, you can certainly upload those 30 drivers to do queries for under that company. But if it's an owner operator situation, they are all individual companies. You can only do it per company. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that makes sense, Tony. I do have a follow-up question. Do you run into the issue with the employers that you assist with their driver CDLs being incorrect? Because I think usually that's where we have the most trouble with the bulk uploads. We have the correct template for uploading it, but oftentimes we run into issues with employers not adding the correct driver CDL information or date of birth. And so we have to go back through, find all of those that did not verify, rerun them, get the accurate information. Do you see that very often? How do you usually address it, or how would you I guess, avoid that if
Well,
possible.
we actually do get that. So when we're doing from year to year, if we did them last year for them, we're comparing the information from last year's spreadsheet because we save those
Right.
to the information they've provided with their current spreadsheet to make sure that the information for the drivers matches what we had previously. I mean, of course, if they have new ones, we're just going to run it as they give it to us. But for ones that we previously run those queries on, we double check our information because you are going to run into, for instance, we were doing a pre-employment query, and generally you don't put the state abbreviation in the box with the CDL number.
Right.
Well, Maryland has changed theirs. You have to put the MD in front of it now.
Oh.
And we had no idea until we tried to run one. We tried it every way we could, and the employer kept saying, no, 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 the information is correct. The information is correct. Well, when we put the MD in front of the CDL number, the query went through just fine. So there was a change that we were unaware of.
And just obviously, that was the first time we've heard that as well. So thank you for the information. Do you foresee Clearinghouse, well, not really Clearinghouse, I guess, but each state making those same type of updates? Do you think Clearinghouse will notify us of those changes, or do we just kind of have to come across it as we come across it and ask the Clearinghouse when that scenario comes up?
Well, I would hope in a perfect world that they would let us know in advance.
Right.
Unfortunately, I don't think that's how that's going to work. I
Got it.
always keep an eye on the updates that come across the top when you log into the clearinghouse. If something's going on, like for instance, if queries aren't going through for a particular state,
Yeah,
you'll
right.
see a yellow bar across the top of the screen, and generally there will be information in there that, you know, the state is having an issue right now, so you may be unable to run queries. So we kind of keep an eye on that. But as far as if the states are making those kinds of changes, the clearinghouse isn't notifying us.
Got it.
That's something you're going to find out when you come across and you've tried every single way to run that particular query till you finally actually find the combination that works.
That makes sense.
Is there some sort of like forum that all the clearinghouse employer inputs going on so we can update this?
I'm sorry, say again, you're asking if there's a forum?
Is there some sort of, I don't want to say group chat, but is there some sort of like community that people can update other people without randomly going into meetings and find out randomly?
Not that I'm aware of. That would be a great idea, though, if we had something like that where we could go check. Right now, the only way we have of checking for any kind of information like that is going under the clearinghouse FAQs and see if anybody has asked that question.
Okay.
If they can.
That's a great idea. One mechanism is we could set up a LinkedIn group specifically for, clearinghouse, called the Clearinghouse Forum for employers and TPAs. I can work towards maybe doing that.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let us know. And also, Tony, is there anything that you can think of maybe on the top of your mind? Things that we may not know or popular occurrences that have been happening that maybe we don't know?
Well, something that we kind of run into off and on is issues with queries, and we can go back and see that we clearly did a query on this driver and nothing in that information has changed with what they're providing us. So a lot of times we're finding out that they're giving us their previous CDL number and they have now changed states. So that's something, if you're running into an issue verifying somebody's CDL number, you might want to ask them, have you recently moved and changed the state of your CDL? Because if they did, guaranteed their CDL number is not the same. So we need the current CDL number in order to run that query for them. We run into that, off and on. Like, look, we did this last year. Why is this not going through? Then come to find out, oh, they moved. to a different state.
And I just learned yesterday that it takes at least 10 days for the new CDL to update in the clearinghouse system.
Yes, yes. So that may cause a delay too. One thing I did want to let you guys know, when you were running annual queries and it goes from a limited to a full, are you aware that the driver has 24 hours to consent to that full query, or they have to be removed from safety sensitive duties?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Because we absolutely make sure to tell our employers, hey, he's got 24 hours or you have to remove him.
Mhm.
Yeah, we send out notices to the employers anytime that happens as well, just so that they're aware.
Absolutely.
And Joe, this might be a question more related to you, Tony, you as well. I don't know if either one of you know or have any knowledge on this, but do you think sometime in the future that the clearinghouse would have any plan for like an API integration, more so for the conducting of queries?
Yeah, I mean, they get asked that question every time they do a presentation with any industry associations, and probably multiple times a day by email, and their answer is no plans at the moment.
Got it. Just figured I'd ask.
Never hurts, right?
Never hurts to ask.
Keep asking.
Right? Exactly. Keep asking till they do it. All right. Well, any other questions, guys? I think that's it from our end. We
Sounds great.
appreciate you taking the time to go through everything with us.
All right, hopefully it's been helpful.
Yeah, very helpful.
Good, excellent. All right, well, you guys have a great day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you,
a
guys.
good day, everybody.
You
You
too.
do the same.